So welcome to this short video on clinical research basics. It's part of our clinical research basics program, and this is session 1. And the title of this session is What is a clinical trial? So we're going to look at this question in 3 or 4 different parts. So we're going to look at the drug development process or the medicines development process. Then we're going to look at clinical research phases and the different phases of clinical research and how they fit into the drug development process. And then finally, we'll look at a definition of what is a clinical trial and also the life cycle or the clinical trial processes that we go through. So firstly, the drug development process or the medicines development process. The first step in developing a new medicine is the discovery part. So that's where we find something that we think will work, we think will solve a problem or cure a condition. And there are lots of different ways of doing this. Sometimes it's just luck and sometimes it's very scientific research. Once we've got a product that we think might work, we then go into what we call in vitro research. So this is the laboratory research that we do using maybe parts of animal tissue or cell cultures that will help us to see whether the product is going to work or not. We then go into preclinical research, which is more about whole animal research. And animal research is an unfortunate part of developing a new medicine at the moment. We can't really do anything about that. We have to do that part. But once we have enough information from our preclinical research, we'll then go into clinical trials and the clinical development program. And then that will help us to put together the information that we need to apply for a marketing authorization so that we can place our product on the market. Now, although these are different steps, there are quite a lot of overlaps between these steps, and particularly the preclinical research will often go on alongside the clinical trials. And also we will do clinical trials once the product is on the market as well. Our research doesn't stop once we get a marketing authorization. So while we're in our clinical research phase, there are several different steps that we go through when we're developing a new medicine. We'll look first of all at pre-marketing. So this is unlicensed medication and we haven't got an authorization to market this product yet. And there are generally considered to be 3 phases that we go through pre-market. So phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. So phase 1 is often also referred to as first in human clinical trials. And this is the first time that we give the product to people rather than to animals. And so obviously that needs to be very tightly controlled and we have very small numbers. These trials are often done in healthy volunteers rather than patients if that's ethical. But there are a lot of situations like chemotherapy is, we know we're going to have lots of side effects. So we wouldn't use that in healthy volunteers because that wouldn't be ethical. So phase 1, small numbers and just checking that the product is safe enough for us to use. We're really looking at safety testing here. We then go into phase 2, provided we get through phase 1 okay. And phase 2 is often the first time the product is given to people with the condition that we want to treat. So actual patients with the disease. Again, these are very tightly controlled, very small numbers, and we're quite mostly concerned with safety testing at this stage. And then once we've got through phase 1, phase 2, and it looks like the product might work and might be safe enough to use, then we'll go into phase 3. And phase 3A are our big clinical trials, often run in lots of different countries and often referred to as pivotal clinical trials. And they're pivotal because the marketing authorization application is pivotal on having these trials completed and the evidence from these trials. So that's phase 3A, and then usually at the end of phase 3A, we'll apply for a marketing authorization. And while the marketing authorization is going through its lengthy approval and consideration process from the regulators, we will sometimes do what we call phase 3B trials. And these might be just to get more information about the product or maybe to support the marketing messages that we want to use when we get onto the market. So those are the trials that are run before we get a marketing authorization with a medicinal product. But clinical research doesn't stop when we get to the market. There's a lot of post-marketing research that goes on as well. And sometimes that might be a condition of the marketing authorization. So the regulator might say, yes, you can have your license, but we want you to do more research in this particular area. So we have several different types of research that go on post-market. We have phase 4, which are generally run at the behest of the organisation that owns the product, and they're really about getting more information about the product once it's on the market, maybe comparing it to other products on the market, or if a new product comes on the market, we might do a phase 4 to see how ours compares. There are also what we call PAS and PAES. So PAS is post-authorization safety studies, and PAES is post-authorization efficacy studies. And they might be interventional clinical trials, like a phase 4 trial, or they might be non-interventional, what we call non-interventional, which would be more observational. So we have post-marketing observational research where we're not assigning treatment to the patients and we're not doing lots of extra testing on patients. We're really just observing what happens in clinical practice with our product. And then even broader than that comes epidemiology, where researchers may be looking at lots of different products on the market and looking really at population impact from the product. So epidemiology is a much broader, much wider type of research. So that's the clinical trial phases. Some are observational, some are interventional. If the trial is interventional, so we're assigning treatment according to a protocol, or we're doing a lot of testing of the people taking part in the trial, then there's lots of rules and regulations that we have to follow, and that's known as good clinical practice, which will be the subject of another video. So keep an eye out for that one. So the next thing we're going to look at is the clinical trial process. So first of all, we're going to look at the official definition of what a clinical trial is, and then we'll look at the life cycle of a clinical trial. So this is the official definition of a clinical trial, and there are a lot of big words in here, so I'll try and explain them. This definition comes from a document called ICH E6R2, and this is a guidance document, an international guidance document called Good Clinical Practice. So it really talks about the requirements that we have to follow when we're conducting clinical trials. So the definition of a clinical trial is any investigation or a research project in human subjects, so we're talking about people here, not animals, and it's intended to discover or verify the clinical, pharmacological, or other pharmacodynamic effects. So clinical is what happens to the patients, pharmacological is what happens to the drug as it goes through the body, and pharmacodynamics are what the drug does to the body. So all of these effects, and we're talking about in an investigational product, or more accurately, an investigational medicinal product. So it might be on the market or it might not be, it might be unlicensed, but if it's being used as the object of research in a clinical trial, then it's an investigational medicinal product. It might also be, moving on through the definition, and or to identify any adverse reactions to an investigational products. So that means the side effects or potential side effects, and or to study absorption, so how the drug gets into the body, distribution, where it goes once it's in the body, metabolism, is it changed chemically while it's in the body, and also the excretion, so how does it get out of the body again. Of, again, an investigational product with the object of ascertaining its safety. So how toxic is it? What side effects does it have? And or efficacy. And efficacy is about whether the drug works or not. So does it actually do what we want it to do? So that's the definition of a clinical trial. And the two main things are it's in human subjects and it involves an investigational medicinal product. And that's what we're wanting to find out about. So the object of the research is the investigational medicinal product. So finally, we're going to look at the life cycle of a clinical trial. And we're going to look at 4 areas. So we'll look at the design of the trial, startup, the treatment phase, and the closeout. So firstly, looking at the design, what we do is we develop a hypothesis. And that's really the question that we want to answer from doing this clinical trial. And usually there'll be more than one question. So we'll be looking at how well does the drug work? And also, what's the safety profile of this drug? What are the side effects likely to be? Or what side effects are we going to see? So that's the first step, is to have the questions that we want to answer. And then we write a protocol, which is the methodology, it's the how-to. How are we going to run this trial? How are we going to answer this question? What sort of patients do we need? What sort of assessments do we need to do of them? And then we'll do a feasibility assessment where we check if the protocol is going to be suitable, whether it's going to work. So we'll talk to some doctors and we'll find out their views on how the protocol looks. Is it going to work? Will they have patients to put into this trial? Are the assessments appropriate? So once we've done that feasibility, we can then finalise the protocol, and that's the design phase. So the next section is the startup. So there are several things that we need to do here. We need to select sites for the clinical trials. So the sites may be hospitals or clinics where the patients are going to be seen, and then the doctor, who's known as the investigator, will treat the patients, give them the product, collect all the information and review how the patients are doing, and then pass all of that information on to the owner of the product. We then go into approval. So that's the site selection. So we select sites that will be able to do all of that. Then we go into the approvals. So we have a clinical trials authorization, or CTA, and that's the regulatory or legal approval to conduct the clinical trial in a particular country. And we also have to get ethics committee approval. And the ethics committee is an independent group that reviews the ethical aspects of the trial, and they either approve it or they say no. And once we've got those approvals in place, we then move on to site initiation. And that's where we get the sites ready to enter the first patient. So once the site initiation process is complete, we can then move in to the treatment phase, which is the next part. So during the treatment phase, the investigators will recruit patients into the clinical trial. They'll provide the product to them. The sponsor of the clinical trial, which is usually the company that owns the product, they will monitor what's going on. So they'll send people to the investigational sites to talk to the doctor, to review all the data and to check that it's all complete and there aren't any discrepancies or anything that doesn't make sense. Once they've done that monitoring part, then there's a data management process where the information is put into the database for the company to then analyse the data, review it. And again, the data managers will look at the data, make sure there are no obvious mistakes or missing information, and make sure that it all looks the way it's supposed to. And then there's also something called PV, which stands for pharmacovigilance. And that's all about reporting potential side effects. And there are lots of rules about that. And we can't really cover that in this session, but there's lots of training available on side effects and reporting potential side effects. So once all the patients have been recruited and all the data has been entered into the database, we can then move on to the closeout phase. So the closeout phase is where we close down the clinical trial at each of the sites, and then we do what we call a database lock. So the database where all the information from the patients has been entered into a central database, that database will be locked so that nobody can make any more changes to that information. The information in that database then goes to the statisticians and they do their statistical analysis. So they pool all of the information and they do various tests on it to find out what the results actually mean and what the information shows us. And then that statistical analysis will be used to write a clinical study report. So the last thing that we do is to write a report that summarises all of the data, but also talks about the conclusions. So it answers those questions that we talked about in the design phase. So does it work? Does the product work? Does it do what we want it to do? And how well does it do it? And also, what's the safety profile? So what kind of side effects have we seen and how safe is the drug? And that allows us to do what we would call a risk-benefit analysis. Then all of that information will be included in the application for a marketing authorization. So that's the end of our little session, looking at what is a clinical trial. There are other sessions in this process, so have a look at the other videos, find out more information about clinical research. And if you're interested in more training in this area, or you're interested in a career in clinical research, then please do get in touch and I can provide you with more information.